Metabolism is the set of life-sustaining chemical processes that allow life to operate as we know it. This means taking energy in various forms and then breaking it down into its more fundamental components, and also building the components back up in ways that we would find useful for things like our own energy and structure so that we can actually live our lives. This allows us to grow, regenerate, and respond to our surroundings. So as you may have assumed yourself from that overview, metabolism is a combination of two different processes. There's the process of breaking down substances for energy or for structure, in which we force the substance back into its building blocks, which is known as catabolism. Then once we've broken down things, we need to rebuild them into something that is useful to us, and this process is known as anabolism. One way to perceive metabolism is to imagine that someone has built something with Legos, and you also want to build something with Legos. So you could take the already built Lego structure and begin to break it down so that you could make your own structure. You would break it down to an extent, of course. We would not want to melt the plastic, but we would break it down into its individual Lego pieces. But we might not actually have to break it down into individual Lego pieces uniformly. If there's a fragment from the previous structure that can be perfectly used in your structure, then there's no need to break it down, and we can just directly put it to use. So after the metaphorical catabolism process would come the process of anabolism. And so we would use the broken down pieces and rebuild them into whatever structure you actually cared about. So this metaphor is actually extremely similar to what goes on in organisms when undergoing the process of metabolism. So what was it that originally began the process of metabolism from a universal standpoint? How do living things know how to metabolize things? Where does that skill come from? There's a really interesting answer to that question, because it actually originates from fusion reactions in stars. Let's take the sun for example. You may or may not realize that the sun is only one of several stars that have been involved in the process of life as we know it. For most species of life on Earth, the sun is our most direct source of energy by a long shot. The only things that don't rely on the sun would probably be microbes and bacteria at the bottom of the ocean, where they harness the heat of hydrothermal vents. But for almost all life, the sun is our primary source of energy. Now the reason why the sun is not the only component in the creation of current life is because this actually includes dead stars from billions of years ago as well. The reason for this is because pretty much all of the heavier elements that we're made of and that we see around us, such as carbon, oxygen, and we could just keep going, pretty much everything in the environment except for hydrogen was constructed by fusion reactions of hydrogen, which take place in stars. So technically, we're all made of remnants of stars. So if we went back to current life now, not only do stars provide us with the majority of the elements that we see today, they also provide us with radiation, specifically light and heat radiation. This radiation beams out in all directions from the sun, and some of it hits the earth. Some types of organisms are able to harness the light energy from the sun and use that energy to begin to construct the materials and the food that it needs to survive. A common example of this is plants. And as we learned in the last unit, plant cells are able to harness light energy using chloroplasts, which are a type of plant cell organelle. The process that these organisms go through is called photosynthesis. And as the word implies, photo means light in Greek, and so it means taking things out of light. One question that is not very commonly asked is that while we can see these plants growing to their metabolism, where is that material coming from? What does a tree use to go from a sapling to a mature tree? A common assumption would be that it's probably coming from the ground, and while that's partially true because some nutrients that the tree uses are from the soil, it's really all about fixing carbon. And we'll talk about this a lot, especially when we get into the carbon cycle. So what I mean by fixing carbon is that we know that plants use light energy, water, and carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So in this process, the plants are able to take the carbon from the carbon dioxide and form bonds with it, which alters the carbon from its gas form to its solid form. These can be used in glucose molecules, and then that glucose can be used to build up cellulose and other starches which are used for plant cell walls and structural support. So this is how plant cells retrieve the materials that they need in order to grow from the air itself. So these plants are able to now comfortably metabolize using photosynthesis But how do we gain what we need for metabolism? What we can do is feed off of the plant's photosynthesis by using the plants as a food source. Some of these plants can be directly used as a food source, such as wheat for bread, or the fruits and vegetables that come from the trees and vines. Other animals that might be herbivores, such as cows, will eat the plants directly, like grass, and then break them down with the help of bacteria, and then rebuild them into useful things for the cow, such as growth, energy, and milk. So what this cow and many other animals that can't use photosynthesis are doing is metabolizing plants by first using catabolism for the plant components and then using anabolism to turn them into useful things for the cow or other animal. One common question is, what are the materials that often get metabolized? Pretty much all of them can be found on the back of any nutritional label of edible products, because that's the main purpose of the nutritional labels. It's telling you what your body is going to metabolize from the food that you're going to eat. So carbohydrates are a prime example of common metabolic substances. These could either be simple sugars like glucose and fructose, or polymers of these sugars, which could be polysaccharides or starches. We could be talking about lipids, so fatty acids and cholesterol, which are essential for various metabolic pathways in organisms. Another example is proteins, which are made of amino acids. The majority of these things are very common and well known, and are found in the foods that we eat. So these are the nutrients that we consume for our metabolism. We first undergo catabolism to break down these things to their basic structures, and then like everything else, we undergo anabolism. And we use the nutrients to make our bodies what they are, and allow our bodies to be fueled with the energy that it needs to function optimally. The finished product and true molecular currency of energy is known as adenosine triphosphate, or ATP for short. The key for why it's the primary currency for energy are the three phosphate groups, which makes the second word of the molecule, triphosphate. So there is a lot of energy that is stored in between the phosphate groups, and so when one of the phosphate groups is broken off of the molecule, a lot of energy is released, and this can be used to create all sorts of life mechanisms, including the ability to metabolize in the first place. So the use of ATP is extremely vital to the basic function of organisms. ATP is actually a very interesting molecule because it can be broken down into a precursor for RNA and DNA. And so not only is it the energy currency for life as we know it, but also a potential precursor for genetic information. So it's crazy to see how these certain molecules go through the processes of catabolism and anabolism and the extremely repetitive patterns that you'll see in biology over and over again because of how fundamental they are to life itself. So this whole thing can be so easily applied to your everyday life. Look at the things that you're consuming and you'll continuously see these metabolic patterns. And it's all a little mind-blowing because the energy that influences the process change that allow life as we know it begins with the fusion reactions from stars. Also, the majority of elements that you see around you, aside from hydrogen, are created from the reactions of hydrogen, as we've now learned. Even you yourself are the product of fusion reactions from stars billions of years ago. So after this very content-heavy video, I hope you got a closer connection and relation with the universe, as you're made of it, and learned something new about how organisms are able to metabolize certain elements into use. We will take a deeper look into the molecule of ATP for a deeper understanding. But for now, I thank you all for watching.